The Vibecatch podcast brings you the latest in employee engagement, workforce productivity, and people analytics.
Hi, Lisa. Good morning.
Good morning, Konstantin. Nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you again. I'm happy you had the chance to take this call, as our discussion in Amsterdam at Unleash was pretty interesting on several HR topics. And following up on that, I would like to ask you, because you're so into the HR, basically into the industry, so deep into it. I would like to ask, like, if you see any current or emerging trends that are coming up right now.
Well, I think there are a lot of trends. HR has itself in a very difficult situation. There's the ongoing digitalization of businesses, and I think every industry, if they think they're not being disrupted, they are. They just haven't yet seen it or felt it.
Yes.
And it's really bringing about a lot of people struggles. I think one big thing that I have seen is a shift from focus on employee engagement and trying to measure straightforward engagement to talking more about employee experience. A lot of the same metrics, a lot of the same information is used, but I think businesses are leveraging the insight and knowledge they've gained from doing things like their customer journeys and applying that now to their employees, which is bringing about some really interesting things. There are also a lot of HR departments that are undergoing their own transformations over the last, 15 plus years. Most businesses have undergone almost constant reorganizations.
We've seen that as well in quite a lot of areas, especially with the digitalization. It changes quite a lot how businesses, do and work every day and engage with people and other businesses as such.
Yeah. And unfortunately, HR, usually because they are the ones doing the reorganizations and leading that, they've been a little bit left behind. They haven't quite kept pace with the change in the rest of the business. So I see a lot of HR departments that are recognizing that and really trying to undergo their own transformation so that they can better meet the business needs.
All right. That's what we've seen as well, and especially in HR. From my perspective, we saw quite a huge trend in people analytics. Like companies are more and more interested to measure and see how people are feeling, performing, evolving in the work environment. So what would you say, what are some of the buildings? You mentioned employee experience. What would you say are some of the building blocks of employee experience? Like, how would someone who's maybe new to that look at it?
Well, the interesting thing about employee experience is that it really is sort of taking those same people analytics and that data that you just referenced, that a lot of companies have become really interested in and understand the value of, and putting the narrative to it.
All right.
Building the story around, okay, so what is actually going on? So often companies will spend a lot of time doing, engagement surveys, trying to get lots of information, and then are a little bit at a loss about what to do with that data. What does it mean? How do we make things better with the data? What do we do with it? And by plotting it into an experience journey, it creates a story, a narrative that is much easier to understand, has much more impact, and you can feel much more tangible niche areas where you can make changes that will hopefully shift that one way or another.
Definitely. And, stories, as you mentioned, stories before, we are biased in stories. I mean, we grow up with stories. So definitely it's something that companies should look into it, especially when it comes to employees. what we've seen also from experience and from other interacting with other companies is that some of the management issues and problems, if you want to call them like that, are a result of maybe faulty or bad communications. So my question would be, how do you see that senior management can make sure that they understand what the employees expect from them in order to communicate that more effectively, efficiently?
Yeah, well, I absolutely communication. I wouldn't say just with senior management, but probably across all areas of every
Yes,
every
that's so true.
business.
Yeah.
It's really a challenge, especially if you're working in a larger multinational company where you're fighting against time zones and language barriers and cultural barriers, and just all of those differences. At the end of the day, though, what I always remind the senior managers that I work with, whether it's people in the C-suite at board level, or other echelons within an organization, is that we're all people, and there are some basic things that all people need. One is a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
So the sooner you can start telling the story of we. Who are we? What are we doing about the challenges that we face? What are we doing about the hopes that we have? It helps people get aligned and on board and incredibly motivated. And motivation is something that goes beyond engagement. Engagement is a willingness to listen, a willingness to participate, and motivation is an active participation. There's also a sense of psychological safety that's needed. And it's interesting when I talk to businesses about psychological safety, it's not about providing everything for everyone all of the time. It's not about taking, that ultimate stewardship that I think so many companies do associate with it and are terrified. They're very afraid.
Yeah.
It's more about making sure that you're providing an environment where people feel that they can show up and at least be heard. You don't have to agree with everything that everybody says or thinks or feels. There will always be differences. But feeling that there is the space to do so safely. And we're not talking about things that, lead to harassment or unhealthy, unwanted behaviors, but just in day-to-day interactions, having opinions and thoughts and feelings heard, and there being space for it just to be heard, is incredibly important. And it goes a long way in how you communicate. When you communicate in that inclusive way about we, and then there's also space built in for different thoughts and opinions, it really changes the way that people interact and the way that they show up at work and the levels of motivation that you see.
I fully agree. The space that you mentioned, it's so important. Many times I feel that employees are having a hard time expressing themselves. And I think that probably the underlying fear to that is that, well, what if I say something and I get fired? Or what if I say something and I'm bullied? Or what if I say something and people are looking at me like, what do you mean by that? And I do believe that creating that space that you mentioned essentially will help companies actually be more inclusive and kind of like cut the division between a company and employees and become basically one organism where everybody's motivated and understands that, well, this is a journey that we decided to take together, and this is a journey that we should have fun on, and
yes, absolutely.
less stress and more fun on that. And speaking of stress, I think that we see quite a lot in today's work environment, especially big organization, but it goes the scale. It doesn't. It's not necessarily only big organizations, small and medium-sized companies. That there is an increase in stress levels, and a lot of people are burned out, while then the productivity goes down. So the question would be, how do you think people or companies or how we should manage the stress levels and avoid the burning out employees and maybe keep a high level of productivity in that sense.
Yeah, that's also such an important question. I want to backtrack just to one thing though as well on the psychological safety. It not only provides more effectiveness and efficiency, but it's also how businesses can unleash the innovation that sits within them. So it's not just about maintaining a status quo. It's about finding the things that will help them accelerate, and creating that space for psychological safety to show up is one really key thing, because that's really where innovation lives. It goes to inclusion, but it goes beyond inclusion to unleashing those ideas that, as you said, people may be hesitant to raise because it's disruptive, it's different, it's not going along with the status quo. But that's exactly what companies need to be uncovering in the wealth of the resources of their people, and the brilliant people they spend a lot of time and money recruiting and paying.
Yes.
So it's about, really maximizing that potential and finding the innovation. The question of stress. Wow. Yeah. Such an important question. Because it is, rates of burnout are increasing. I will raise my hand and wholeheartedly admit I faced a burnout. I made my way through a burnout.
Guilty.
Yep. And I think that's the funny thing is that, most people, we see it happening around us. A lot of times we don't talk about how we've been personally impacted by it, either by our own burnout or by a colleague or somebody that we've seen, a partner maybe.
Yep.
It's still a little bit taboo to talk about, which is why I do try to take ownership and, raise my hand proudly and say, I faced a burnout and it was one of the hardest times of my life, but I learned so much from it. I think companies, again, I see a lot of things happening that are similar to talking about psychological safety. Companies feel like it's this big thing they need to take stewardship of, and they don't want to, or they don't know how. And so they shy away from it. They don't like talking about workplace stress. I remember once for a company I was working with, a large tech company, we had a health and wellness week. And we had a whole lot of activities around health and wellness. There was a company that wanted to come in and talk about workplace stress and how to make it better. And they said, we'd love for you to come in and share your insights with us, but please do not talk about stress. They were afraid of it.
Okay.
They were afraid of having this conversation because I think the fear is that they will somehow be blamed, that somehow a finger will be pointed at them of, the pace of work is too high and you were making this happen. And I think it's a combination of things. I think, number one, individuals, we don't really fully have the full set of coping skills to deal with this crazy VUCA digital, constantly changing world that we're in.
I agree.
We don't know how to deal with the massive amount of information overload that is constantly pushed at us. We don't have all of the coping skills to deal with the fact that we live in a 24/7 environment, and
always on.
Always on, yeah. And as roles in companies become more and more globalized, there's always somebody tugging at your, coat string saying, hey, I need something. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's very different than it was in the past. So I think there's an element of personal responsibility for people to develop their own coping skills, find what works for them, find what they need in order to thrive, and embrace it, accept it, and be very vocal about it, own it. I am not a huge morning person. I used to, when I had a global responsibility, I would start getting emails, in the middle of the night, because that was when Australia and Asia were waking up. I'd usually wake up at about, 4 o'clock in the morning and start sending email messages to them, go back and get ready and head into the office. But that does not make me an effective person.
That makes you probably a very stressed person, stressed out person.
Well, it wasn't just the stress of it, but it was the, I'm not a great morning person. And so, like we already said, communications are so important. And I will wholeheartedly own that, my communications were probably not optimal at that time of day, because that's just, it doesn't match what my body needs and wants. So there's a level of personal responsibility of know yourself and understand what you need, accept what you need, and then call it out. Be very clear about what it is that you need, because that's where people can choose to meet you where you're at, or not, where it's not possible. And if it's not possible, then maybe that's not the right environment for you. So there's a level of personal responsibility about the stress, figuring out what works, and also holding your own boundaries.
Yeah.
And then the responsibility, I think, for companies isn't to try to make everybody happy all of the time or try to take away workplace stress. Some levels of stress are good, can even be needed to make progress, but also not having that relentless demand, accepting that people are human beings, that they do have limits, and that it's just as important to have periods of rest, have periods of downtime. You can't constantly be on 24/7 for extended periods of time. In moments of crisis, yes, people can absolutely rise to the occasion. But when it becomes constant, that's where it gets really unhealthy, both for individuals and companies, because then, again, you have people who are communicating, making big decisions, deciding about, things that have huge impact on their markets, on their people, on their budgets. And if they are tired, if they are stressed out, if they are sleep deprived,
they affect the whole company.
Absolutely. They are probably not making the best decisions.
Most likely not.
And we recently saw some very big examples of this. Elon Musk, he in autumn did his interview where he proclaimed all of the hours and that he was sleeping days in the office, and then, made some very big missteps that caused him to have to step down as chairman of the board.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm a huge fan of Elon Musk and the whole work he's doing. So I'm following him closely. It's quite interesting what you said, that the responsibility is both on the employee side and also on the company side. And I do feel that that's the case. Companies actually should maybe listen more, because I think that if people, as you said, like, you express yourself, you tell what your boundaries are, you should be comfortable with some amount of stress level. But I feel that if for example, if employees tell that and communicate that openly, but companies are not listening to them, it feels like it's then at some point you get into that kind of vicious circle. Well, people tell, nothing happens, and it kind of gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And I've met companies, I've seen companies, I've friends working companies where the employee turnover, it's so insanely high, and that's because of the fact that the company is not listening to what is actually happening there. As I'm sure the signals are all over the place, and people are complaining, or at least they're expressing themselves, because complaining always tends to have the word complaining as maybe a negative connotation. But so that's what I also felt, that companies not always are listening to what's happening in the workplace.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, not every company has the ability within its senior management teams to really listen to those hard messages and make space for it. As you said, though, those companies, they suffer high turnover rates, they suffer high sickness rates. And typically those companies are not in a position where they can thrive financially for an extended period of time. And I think we'll only continue to see an acceleration of that. Companies will continue to struggle at increasing rates if they refuse to hear what's happening with their people and what's going on. It's such an important metric.
Hiring people takes time and resources, and hiring them very often takes a lot more time and a lot more resources than actually expected. And actually, my next question you kind of answered in a way, because I was about to ask you, like, who is responsible for the employee well-being within a company? Is it the senior management? Is it the leadership, the board? Are the HR people, the HR department, or are the employees themselves? But you hinted that it's a combination of factors.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a level of personal responsibility. Individuals need to be aware of what they need. If they don't know what they need and how they best work and
True.
how they can best thrive,
Yeah.
they can't communicate it, and then everybody's lost.
Yeah.
But it is, as you rightly pointed out, it is up to particularly senior management to listen and to take meaningful action. As you also quite rightly said, companies spend a tremendous amount of time and resource trying to recruit the best people. And when there's a constant turnover, that's a massive energy leak in resources, in funding, in mental capacity that people have. And it's not an environment where again, people or the business can thrive. I always say people are not only a company's most expensive resource. If you look at pretty much any company in any industry, and you look at their OPEX, usually the biggest spend has to do with people. So
Exactly.
they are your most valuable asset, but they're also the only asset that once they've been acquired, they continue to be scalable.
Exactly.
Continue to learn and grow. So why in the world would you not listen to and heavily invest in this asset that is your most expensive, your most valuable, and the only one that you can still scale once they're on board?
Exactly. And there's a talk that technology disrupts everything right now, and as much as that is true, I do feel that actually people disrupt everything, because people develop technology. So in a way, technology was developed, was created, is created constantly by people. And in the hiring process, I do believe that constantly hiring new employees that eventually they leave will disrupt also the teams. Because they need to be adjusted with the new team, maybe come from a different background, different culture. And at the same time, if they're not happy, they will leave. So that team gets disrupted, then it's kind of less productivity, etc. So it's quite an interesting circle how this spins in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is incredibly disruptive that, the constant turnover of people. And it, that old adage of the only constant is change is certainly more true than ever. It's not about trying to remove change. And that's usually an ongoing conversation between, HR and any company, is what level of change is right and how much is needed. And quite frequently there's a baseline of the company needs to continue to change in order for it to survive, the markets changing and all of the volatility that is brought both internally and externally. But there's a way to go through change and to maintain that agility without it having to be disruptive to your people in the way that we frequently see right now. And I'm hopeful that will continue to change as companies, continue to go on these employee experience journeys, listen to, okay, what does that engagement data actually tell us, and what can we really do about it?
Yeah.
Because it is important. They can't continue to sustain those massive energy leaks.
I fully agree. Lisa, one last question from my side. What would you say that senior management companies can do actually to close this communication gap between between HR practitioners and senior management? What's like really hands-on that people can do right away?
Yeah, I love that question, because actually I spend a lot of time addressing things kind of around this topic in the leadership coaching that I do. I think the biggest, most tangible thing that they can do is park their judgment, let go of the need to know, and just get really curious. You know, tune into the curiosity. The old models of leadership where senior management or people in decision-making positions need to know everything are long gone. You know, some of the smartest leaders I've seen in business and the smartest people I've seen in senior management readily admit that they don't know, and they regularly seek out opinions, information, help from the younger people, the digital natives,
Yeah.
who are much more skilled in certain things than they will ever be, or they really need to be. I mean, we spend all this time and money hiring smart people. Let's let them be smart. Ask them. So yeah, I think that is the first step, is, you know, just embrace your own humanity and let go of the need to know, let go of any judgment, and just get really curious and start asking people questions.
That brings also a very interesting issue to build on top of that, what you just said. I think that's, besides the curiosity, it implies a lot of trust. Like, trust that, you know, the people that you hired, that you know, spend so much money developing and hiring, that they will do the job that they are hired for. I think that's the curiosity is the first step, like how a child would look at a new stone, for example, to the fact that trust that, you know, you're going to do a great job because I believe in you. I hired you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something really magical. It's funny, I get goosebumps just talking about it. There's something really magical that happens in that space, because it is the space of trust, and it is the space of engaging people to do what it is that they are great at. You know, there's so much frustration for people out there. People are more well educated, they are smarter than ever before, and yet we're still hiring them and parking them on the sidelines and saying, no, wait, stop thinking, do what you're told.
Exactly.
And it's detrimental to both sides.
Yes, exactly. That's very frustrating when, you know, but I have something to say here. Look at me, you know, maybe, yeah. So
yeah, it's incredibly frustrating, and that will immediately remove any motivation from any intelligent person. And again, yeah, going back to that space of psychological safety, you know, making the space where people can let their voices, what they think, be heard, and senior management parking their judgment, and standing in that place of curiosity of, wow, okay, so actually what are they saying, and why might that be important? And when you enter the space where nobody needs to be right or wrong, there's just a variety of opinions and ideas, and you get to choose and co-create together what it is that you want to create. It's so much easier.
Because then you feel included in the process and not some kind of, oh, I'm just a contributor. I'm part of the process. I'm part of the whole journey of this thing.
Yeah. And people can there's so much more motivation. They can take personal ownership, and not in that, you know, this is mine and I'm going to safeguard it, but no, they can actively participate. They can be proactive rather than being sidelined and, you know, sitting around twiddling their thumbs going, well, I'll just wait until I'm told what to do because I'm not heard.
Excellent.
And that's a motivation killer to any human being.
I fully agree. Lisa, I would like to thank you so much for taking the time to address these things and to talk to us. And I really love the answers, and I really love this conversation. And I hope, you know, there is a change happening, and we see the change coming. And I'll hope that, you know, things will get better for every company and every employee in that sense, listening more and doing more, being more proactive when it comes to employee engagement, to employee experience, and taking care of that.
Yeah, I think we're learning slowly but surely. It takes time like everything, but I think, you know, the future is bright. We just need to continue tuning in and really listening. and figuring out what we can do together. Really create that we conversation. So thank you so much, Konstantin. It's been really lovely talking to you, and thanks for asking these really powerful questions that are so important for the success of every business and every team.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the VibeCatch podcast. Visit our website, vibecatch.com, for more resources and insights on employee engagement, human productivity, and HR technology. Don't forget to subscribe to get the latest podcast right in your inbox.